All right,
Leila,
yeah.
what do you actually want to do? Like,
What I want to do,
yeah,
I,
nice.
I, I'll guide our conversation this first time, and then I just want to do this monthly because I think CDR needs regular content. I think what you're doing with GigaTen is exactly what should be done, which is regular content updating. I know CDR FYI does some stuff and open air and all that, but I think this is valuable, and I think I can help bring this forward with you, and I'll do this with other people too. But
Cool.
just because we're starting, Sebastian, just a little background on you and why do you decide to do the GigaTen?
Yeah, I guess my background is I'm German Italian, 34 years old. I'm a trained economist. I studied in the UK and the US, but then I was a tech entrepreneur working in global development for around 10 years, trying to fight corruption in global development through technology. The long story short is it was very hard and I left that sector. Then I went on to work for the German government under Angela Merkel. And I guess my calling came, we had a huge catastrophe. I'm from the Dolomites, the Alps in Italy. And we had a huge natural catastrophe a couple of years back where in the span of around 2 hours, millions of trees got just wiped down. And it left these scars all across the landscape that until today you can see it. It's basically just flattened landscapes, right?
What flattened
And
them?
why? The wind. Sorry, I should have said we just had really heavy gusts of wind that destroyed entire landscapes. And where I come from, the trees, the forest is a natural expansion of the people, the villages, right? It's very intricately connected. And that just made me realize, okay, there's bigger fish to fry. Naturally, because I'd worked in tech, I started kind of looking at all the different climate techs that exist. And honestly, I started getting excited about so many things because people are doing such cool stuff. It's incredible. And that makes you really hopeful, right? But when I found CDR, it was like, it just clicked because there was this huge problem that it was a podcast that I listened to and I heard about carbon removal and this problem that was so big that basically we need millions of people to be working on it. And at the same time, I asked all my friends and nobody knew about it. Nobody had heard about it. And I was like, what? This is a dissonance that doesn't make sense. But it's also an opportunity, right? To go in and to be part of that first wave of people who are trying to make this happen. And that's how I ended up here. And now my focus is on policy. My focus is on getting governments, convincing governments around the world to put money on the table to scale these solutions. Because I frankly believe that's the only way that this is going to scale. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, same. When I was, my interest has always been about just the longevity of the human project. I guess is my way of saying like, how do we all live here in a prosperous, free, and and when you saw some of these futures being cut down because of these impacts, you know, and also just a limited view of looking at the holistic environment in general and reducing it only to carbon, because it is about
Yeah.
conservation, it is about pollution, it's about so many other things. But like, obviously, carbon is a forcing mechanism, and there's no reason to toy with that because everyone has these predictions about it's happening, it's not happening, it's this bad, it's not so bad. But again, if it is bad, you're just toying with the entire life support system of the earth. And so what's so exciting about CDR is that what it's doing is not just solving the imbalance of the carbon cycle, but it's also a way to decarbonize and make more efficient materials production, fuel production, and all that other stuff. So I find that to be sort of an evolution in the way we make things too. So rather
Yeah.
than dig it up out of the ground, we take it from the sky. So that part I think is fascinating, besides just the removal side. So I guess as we go down the road and talk about it and more freely, because I know that a lot of people say, oh, you can only talk about removals, you can't talk about utilization. But I think it's all on the table, right? So that's how
We
I
need
feel.
all of it, right? And
Yeah.
I find anyone I'm focused on this because I found my niche and I think I can make a difference here. But I don't
Mhm.
think this is the only thing we need, right? And I find people who think that there's kind of a single solution. Yeah, we need all of it. So happy to talk about
Exactly.
all of it as well.
All right. So let's get into the Giga 10. Why did you decide to do Giga 10, first of all?
So I just felt that at least when I started also working in the space, there was very little bite-sized coverage of policy developments in the carbon removal space. And that led me to first come to LinkedIn. And essentially, as a way for me, I need to stay up to date, right? And I realized I stay up to date by summarizing and synthesizing and writing down. That's how I memorize. And then it's a very small step to actually share it with a community. And that seemed to resonate on LinkedIn. But then I also realized that obviously not everyone sees all my LinkedIn posts, right? And also not everyone has the time to read all that. And I wanted to have almost a layered approach where somebody who has 2 minutes can kind of know the top 10 things that happened in the policy space in the last month, but also with options for people who have 5 minutes or 10 or 50, right? And so this is kind of what I wanted to create with the GigaTen. It's just a very accessible, layered approach to kind of CDR policy events.
Beautiful. All right. So you just came out with your December GigaTen, and we just did have the COP29 in Baku. So you say, did COP29, this is the first of the GigaTen, did COP29 deliver the real deal? What do you think?
It delivered a deal. And again, focused very specifically on CDR. After 9 years, it finally found agreement on Article 6.4. That's worth celebrating. I do think the devil as so often is in the details. And the way that I see Article 6, both 6.2 and 6.4, is very much, it could go either way. Like we have this mechanism that could potentially actually be a ticking time bomb in a certain sense, because it could mean that we're getting kind of UN approved, even if it's not technically true, deals between governments under 6.2 that are actually really shady stuff, right? 6.2 is a decentralized mechanism where governments can essentially agree to do whatever they want. And they can trade stuff that on the voluntary carbon market, we've said in the last couple of years, actually, we shouldn't do that. They could do that under the UN umbrella. And that's dangerous, right? Similarly, in 6.4, we don't differentiate between the durability or permanence of different removals, which means it's going to probably lead to a race to the bottom, right? Even if it's a centralized mechanism. That's the kind of the ticking time bomb side. On the other hand, we can make this work and we can create a whole new market, global market with governments involved, bigger than anything we've seen before for high quality removals. And but we need to make that happen, which means we need to hold governments and players accountable when they're doing stuff that's shady. And we need to push for high quality digital reporting, monitoring, and verification, for integrity, all that stuff that will essentially raise the bar. So again, I don't think we know which way it's going to go, but now at least we have the option of turning it into the last option that I described.
That's great. And that brings you to number 2, which is the Master of All Things Article 6.4. For those of us in the audience, what does Article 6.2, 6.4 get into?
So quick explain of what it does. Is that what you?
Yeah.
So 6.2 was already operational, actually. It's a decentralized mechanism that already has, I think, 98 or something MOUs from different governments, where essentially governments can bilaterally decide to trade avoidance, reductions, removals, even storage. But it's very decentralized. And so this is something where, again, different parties can get together. VCM players, voluntary carbon market players, can get together with governments. And a lot of people are already taking advantage of that. But it was missing a couple of bits and bobs that have now been formalized. So now it can really get going. Article 6.4 is a centralized one. It actually has a name, the Paris Agreement Crediting Mechanism, PACM. Mm-hmm. And 6.4 is centralized and will have centralized standards, right? So it will actually be much, I would say, higher quality and more accountable. And the idea here is to create its own whole new market for voluntary credits. Here we have reductions and removals, not avoidance in it. And it will take a while, actually, because now we can start with the reductions. Then we will have the nature-based solutions, probably in 25, maybe 26. And the durable removals, we don't even have methodologies yet. So this will take a few more years until that part of the market is actually up and running.
So when you say, and because I know that we're going to be talking later about how some of this stuff is going to percolate in America due to the election, but when we say highly centralized, that causes people to be concerned about overregulation. But what you mean by highly centralized is just methodology so that we all understand what we're trading and that we keep certain standards. It's not about controlling certain items.
I mean, let's say it like this. My belief is we need a set of rules that we can all abide by, right? When I say centralized, I really mean there's one set of rules of what quality biochar carbon removal under the UN Article
Right.
6.4 looks like. It doesn't mean that all the players involved is just like a massive UN authority. No, there can be different designated authorities, companies, private sector players, public
Right.
sector players that do the work. But we do need a centralized set of rules. I definitely believe that.
Right. Okay. Moving on to number three. Twice is nice. You say how to keep up with all things CDR policy. Talk to me about Eve. Eve Tame. How do you pronounce her name?
Eve Tame,
Eva Tame.
Estonian.
Sorry, Eva. Okay.
Yeah. Um, so she's very much one of the leading thinkers on not just carbon removals, but also carbon markets more broadly, and also carbon capture and storage. I highly recommend giving her a follow on LinkedIn and also checking out Climate Principles, her company and website. And we've been kind of peering on panels, and at some point we were like, we should just collaborate, we should work together, because whenever we had a conversation, it was so interesting. And so we decided to launch LinkedIn Live. And what we do is we just meet up when there's something exciting happening in carbon removals, and we just have a conversation as if it's just the two of us. So it's really conversational, blunt, and let other people watch it and ask questions and engage. And so yeah,
That's
that's
great.
the CDR policy scoop, as we call it, which we've now launched. We've already done 3. And yeah, we're going to have another one in a week or a week and a half. The next one is going to be on the 2040 targets in the EU, which is a huge topic that we both work a lot on. So we think we have some stuff to say.
Nice. All right. What are CDR dreams made of? $250 for every ton of durable removal.
I mean, this is
Yes.
this piece of policy is so nice. It's such a shame that it probably won't fly. But for context, this is the Carbon Dioxide Removal Investment Act, CDRIA, which for folks familiar with kind of American CDR policy, there's already something called the 45Q tax credit, which is $180 for any ton of CO2 stored through direct air capture. Just huge. It's an open-ended credit for 12 years. People can make a lot of money from this, and it's really spawned this huge industry in the US for direct air capture. And now there's a proposal, actually in the Senate, a bipartisan proposal, the CDRIA, to do the same, but with a higher amount across CDR technologies. It sounds too good to be true, which is probably why it is too good to be true. But this would be a game changer. But the way that it works in the US, just for people who are less familiar, it's still good to get the stuff out there. Because essentially, every 2 years things change in the US, and then when the environment is more favorable, you just have to take it out of the shelf, and it's way less effort than doing the whole thing from scratch. So I'm very glad that it got introduced.
Well, just if you were to pitch it to the new administration, and given that Elon did fund $100 million towards the carbon removal X Prize, and I do know that, it sounds like Trump obviously is interested in industries that make money. How is this helpful? Why would that maybe perhaps fit in their framework?
It's mainly to create sustainable quality jobs in areas that might be suffering from deindustrialization at present in the US. So I would very much go down that path, because we're talking about jobs here that will still exist in 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 years from now, right? And what's also beautiful, but especially when you take a tech agnostic approach, is every state, every district in the US has a role to play. And that's very powerful, because you can
Yeah.
essentially go to the places that have been most neglected, where people are suffering most from what's happened in the last 50 years in the US, and essentially give them a positive growth narrative. And I think that's very much what could work under the current administration.
Well, that's why I find CDR being somewhat politically agnostic. And I also find that, interestingly, some of the older environmental left actually doesn't even like CDR. So in
Yeah,
America, some of the biochar projects are in places that are in Republican states because, New York State has too many laws against things like biochar. So something to
exactly.
put out there for people who are watching this and are new to the space. This is pretty apolitical. It is about jobs. It's about cycling carbon. It's putting the economy inside the carbon cycle. So it's about cleaning up our mess and making materials, and it has a lot to do with jobs. So maybe certain governmental programs that support the growth of this might be okay, because there are governmental programs for all sorts of things. Not, it's not just charity or waste, right? So, because
Exactly.
I know we
But
have a
yeah,
big cost cutting coming, which I think is needed for sure in the United States, but we definitely need to lean in on things that are future oriented. And I think this is it. So I love that you have four, because I wanted to, it's a good way to talk about that. Um, all right, number five, US states turn to put CDR on the map. Yes. State is very different. All states are very different. So, and I love that. So, what is it? Rocky Mountain Institute put together
yeah.
a map. So, talk to us about that.
So this is interesting because actually, 2 3 years ago, I was trying to assess where should I focus my efforts at the state level in the US, and there was no one who'd done any work on this. So I actually did an analysis myself, where I analyzed 50 states as well as I could with a research assistant, and put out kind of the first analysis of its kind at the time. And this is obviously now the natural flow when a institute like the Rocky Mountain Institute takes this on with proper resources. They've done an incredible piece of work where essentially they look at all 50, they look at the potential of all 50 states to develop CDI industries. A nice takeaway that I kind of saw by just laying on top kind of voting patterns, it's not about Republican or Democrat, right? Like you see both the
Right.
potential and the realization going completely across party lines. And the takeaway here is there's some states, take California, take Washington, take Texas, take New York State, that have tremendous potential for developing CDR industries. And because we don't, let's be honest, federal, we don't know which way it's going to go. It could go pro CDR, it could go, we're gonna just be passive on this for the next 4 years. We do know that states, especially some states, are going to lean in heavily, almost as a reaction to what's happening at the federal level. And so that's going to be very exciting for a lot of folks working in CDR.
And a little note to the state of New York: please stop trying to ban biochar.
Thank you.
And DAC. Ah, so yeah. All right. So then you've got number six. When one door shuts, you start like saying, amidst the ripple effects of the Trump election, you went to Brussels.
I mean, for people who are less familiar, we have elections every 5 years in the EU, and we voted a new parliament in June. Then there's a summer break. Then it takes a while to kind of for everyone to settle in. And now everyone has settled in. We have three institutions. We've got the Parliament, the Council, and the Commission. I won't indulge people too much right now, but basically that's now set up and running again. And the Commission is very similar to the previous one with the same president, Ursula von der Leyen. And there's kind of a lot of, I would say, continuity. There's been a slight shift to the right, which means that there's more focus on competitiveness, on jobs, on growth, the same stuff we already spoke about. But there's still the same people in many ways in place, in charge, who want to hold on to ambitious climate policy. The big question is, will Europe take advantage of, I guess, what's happening in the US, with the US kind of leaning back on climate leadership or even taking a step back? The US could take a step forward and attract companies, attract investment, become kind of the green climate hub again. Or, which is also possible, will we see countries saying the richest democracy in the world is taking shortcuts on climate to promote its own industry? Why should we take heavier prices, have high targets, or whatever? So that's kind of what I sensed, is that it could go either direction. The common theme, though, which is great, is people know CDR, people get CDR, people don't question the role of CDR anymore. And that's a huge thing, right? 2 years ago, that was not the case. So the role
Yeah.
of CDR is well established, well understood, but how it fits into this broader EU climate policy, which could go both ways, that's obviously still a bit up for debate.
I'm wondering, I'm trying to also take CDR or just climate innovation, or just get the word climate out of it. Because it's really about the evolution of resources and jobs and the economy towards the future, right? Because
Yeah,
when we discovered oil, coal, and gas, that's where we were at it developmentally as a civilization. Now we have a way to do fuels and materials in different and more exciting ways. So by always calling it climate mitigation, action, investment, tech, or whatever, it immediately puts, I think it sort of narrows the potential for some of this stuff to occur, because there's so much politicization around it. especially in the United States,
Yeah.
because really what we're talking about is innovation. This is innovation. I mean, look, you can now create, when Aircella comes to, I always say to people, basically you're going to be able to take sunlight with a tiny machine in your garage and make your own gasoline. So that's when I get
Amazing.
people's attention. They're like, what are you talking about? I mean, that's revolutionary. That's a huge decentralizing force that takes the ability to create fuel into the hands of everyone. I mean, how does that would impact the world quite substantially? Yeah, and
the
that's
the
almost not
tricky
even a climate question.
the challenge we have with CDR, not with utilization, but with CDR,
Mm-hmm.
is that in many ways we don't create this kind of product, right? We have co-benefits, and there are some methods that have significant, clear outputs that are beneficial for farmers, for all sorts of different things. But in many ways, the example you gave is so tangible because what comes out is fuel, right? And people know fuel, people use fuel. People
Yeah,
don't use the carbon removal, right? It's almost we sell the certificate that this has happened. And
yeah,
and so I think then it's a bit harder in terms of the narrative. But I still think when you talk to governments, the economic opportunity in Europe, for example, Eastern European governments, when I talk to them, they are terrified of carbon removal targets because they say then we'll have to end up buying carbon removal from Germany, right? That's kind of what I've heard. And I'm trying to flip it on its head. And I'm like, you're getting this completely the wrong way. You have a strategic geographical advantage to
yeah.
create carbon removal much cheaper than Germany can. Germany will be missing its targets. Germany will have to buy carbon removal from you, and you'll be able to spin up these industries that export to Germany. But I don't think people, and that's on us, we need to do more educational work,
Yeah.
but people have yet understood the economic opportunity, especially for countries that so far have been probably a bit more lagging behind.
Exactly. I mean, and that's why we're doing this. I mean, it's so new that all of these permutations of trade flows, we don't even have the markets in place yet. So much less how are the trade flows going. So, well, that was number 6. That took a while. And then we have number 7. For all you EU CDR enthusiasts, um, you've recommended Carbon Gap. Why is that?
For those who don't know, I think there's two NGOs globally, one in the US, Carbon 180, and Carbon Gap in Europe, that are just doing incredible work. They're really well staffed. They got 30, 40 people doing nothing all day but working on carbon removal, right? And policy and creating assets and collaterals. And Carbon Gap in particular, they've got a couple of assets that I use all the time. They've got a policy tracker, which is fantastic. And it's always updated. It has information on each country in Europe plus larger European area. It has information on each policy. Like if you have heard CSCF, what is that? EU ETS, what is that? You go on their website and you'll have really good information. They do kind of in-depth country profiles on the potential for CDR in specific countries, like France, for example. And they have a newsletter which I really, really like as well. So it's just a great resource. And in this GigaTen, I also like to just drive people towards the resources that I always use.
That's nice. I'll put those links in the post that we can share together. So, oh yeah, 8. I like 8. Cheers to biochar, BCR. What's BCR and why are we celebrating biochar right now?
Biochar, BCR or biochar carbon removal is one of the permanent carbon removal methods, and it's the one that's dominating deliveries today. So if we look at the last 3 years, pretty much, BCR has been doing 90+% of deliveries for permanent
Yeah.
carbon removal because it's a more mature technology. It doesn't mean that in the future will always be the dominant one, but right now, if you want to do carbon removal permanent one today, you're going to end up doing biochar or BCR. And so it's very exciting. A big debate in the space has been around how permanent biochar is. We can do a whole episode just on that. But
Yeah.
bottom line is there's been a lot of science that came out recently that has essentially looked at biochar permanence from a geochemist perspective instead of a soil agronomist perspective. And that's really changed how we think about it because it came out with a lot of proof of why it is permanent. And now what happened is essentially two scientists, David Karamonti and Hamed Zaneh, who I very much respect and admire, they actually, David buried biochar 15 years ago on a vineyard in Tuscany, but he kept some of it, which was very smart. And now they dug it up and they essentially tested it chemically, both the one that they had put on the shelf and the one that had spent 15 years in the soil. And they saw that basically the amount of inertinite, or kind of the permanent fraction of biochar, had not changed. And that's really big because we don't get a lot of long-term field studies. Like, we don't have time to waste. So it's really rare. Like, people want like, what happens in 100 years? Well, we don't know. We can't wait 100 years, right? To do something like this. So it's great that we have something that at least 15 years is something, right? And so it was a really good one. It got a lot of engagement on my post, but also the New York Times kind of saw that and did a piece on it yesterday. I saw that there was another piece on it coming out today in Trellis. So it's great to see the story getting picked up, because biochar is really kind of this I think this neglected hero in the carbon removal space that should get way more attention than it actually does.
Well, that's why we're making a whole movie called The Biochar Effect, because it's the right, because when we tried to put it in Legion, it was just too much, because there's other elements to biochar: the circularity, the waste transformation of waste, and all of that. But yes, and also it's the biggest removal pathway right now. So, and I'm glad that they found it was more permanent than they thought. So fantastic. All right, tune into CDR Jobs. That's GigaTen number 9. The job market. We need to, and that's one of the reasons why we made Legion 44, was that all of these people are spontaneously emerging into the space around the world, but they also need a lot of engineers. They need everyone to come and help them build what they're building in scale. So how are we going to do that? Is that what they're doing?
That's
CDR
basically
Jobs?
CDR Jobs. I mean, for context, it's kind of one of my side projects. I founded it 6 months ago, and the reason was because I just saw that we're missing a dedicated platform for this transition of talent. If you want to work in CDR, right now, you go on kind of some places, some platforms where CDR is a small percentage of what they actually do. But increasingly, we will hopefully, people who watch your documentary, I hope that they come out of that film saying, I want to work in CDR. Where do I start? And we essentially created a platform where you have every single job in CDR updated every day. And that's CDR Jobs. And also we released, interestingly, yesterday, for example, I released how many people work in CDR, which we actually didn't know. So it's between 5 and 21,000, big range, but at least we have a range now. Essentially what we've done here is just release some more informational content about CDR Jobs, which people can go and check out. But really, my recommendation is just, whether you're already working with CDR or not, go check it out, find your dream job, and let us know how you get on.
I'll send some of the people on our site, because after people watch the movie, oftentimes they go to our website. And one of the questions is, do you want a job in CDR? And I'm getting a lot of people saying, yes, that's why I contacted you. So I'm just going to send them over to you, to CDR Jobs. All right. And this is, I think, probably maybe the most important thing for new people who are joining us, is the last one for this month. Number 10 is, how big is a gigaton? And we talk about gigatons all the time, but how big is a gigaton? Because it's a lot, actually.
This was so interesting because I called it kind of a myth buster. I tried to be a bit more provocative on one of my posts, and I got insane engagement. And it was prompted by conversations I had with startups that told me they need to have a slide in their pitch decks where they say how they're going to be a gigaton carbon removal company. Otherwise, VCs won't take them seriously. And to me, that didn't resonate. Because we need between 5 and 10 gigatons globally. And to give people an idea, the biggest company in the world moving physical goods today is Saudi Aramco, the biggest oil and gas company in the world. They move around 450 megatons per year. The second biggest oil company, Exxon, moves around 90 megatons. And so we expect CDR companies to move a gigaton. It's wildly impossible. It's not desirable. And so I just basically made this case that, yes, we need a gigaton. We need 5. We need 10. But it's actually in our interest to drop the bullshit and stop expecting every company to reach a gigaton and have this highly centralized system. Instead, we need hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of companies to do megatons, tens of megatons, maybe 100. And together with different approaches across the whole world, that will get us to the gigaton and more, right? But this is kind of what this was about. And again, I really encourage people to check out the conversation because people got quite heated and had a lot of interesting viewpoints. But that's exactly what I was hoping for.
Well, it's a fair point because you're basically saying that a startup needs to be already scaled. Like if your tech doesn't immediately scale to that amount of material flow, then you're not worth investing in, right? So that's not fair.
And also the scale, people make it binary. People are like, no, we need to be ambitious. Where would we end up if we're not ambitious? I'm not saying we shouldn't be ambitious. I'm just saying we should be somehow realistic. And so ambitious for me, if a company has a plan to reach 10 megatons, 50 megatons, that would be absolutely huge. It would make them one of the biggest companies in the world, right? So for me, maybe we just need to redefine what ambition in carbon removal for a company means and what investors should also expect.
Yeah, that's fair. And to that point, Heirloom just got $150 million investment, and I find that sort of stacking it's called direct air capture, but it's enhanced rock weathering on trays, basically, right?
Yeah.
Like, with more, watch the movie, you'll know more about what it's about. But so they were able to prove that, I guess, right?
I was really excited. I went to their opening in Tracy last year for their first 1,000-ton facility. And I was actually almost like, they've done a great job on the automation. You have all these robots moving. You've seen it, right? All these robots moving around. And it's incredible. But at the end of the day, it's a lot of dust on some trays, right? And when you ask them, how are you going to scale? They're like, more trays with more dust.
More trays, more dust. Yes. I love that.
But I love it. Like there's simplicity merged with technology. And I really loved it. I think they've got an A-star team. So I was really happy to see that. But I guess what they attracted a lot of investment for is coming back, 45Q, government support, DAC Hubs, which is going to give 600 million to them through government funding, right? Like the government funding for direct air capture has led to this investment landscape for Heirloom. And so this, again, is why it's so important that we focus on policy, because otherwise this type of investment doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm. Interesting, coming full circle. Well, I do think that if this industry can prove, well, it is proving the market case for jobs, for longevity, for also product. And I have been arguing that even though we want to have removals, we have to have, other income streams, and that's probably materials. And why not?
Absolutely.
So,
materials, energy. It can be co-benefits, it can be different things, right? But we do need more diversified income streams.
Yeah. All right, Sebastian, that's our first GigaTen. Thank you so much.
Thank you for doing this. This was really fun. When I wrote these down, I didn't expect this chat, and it was actually really fun. So thank you for doing this, Leila.
Well, next time, right? Let's do it every month.